Right, Sarah, that was fantastic. Okay, what is your second tip you've got for us today?
Okay, so my second tip is probably the one I feel most passionate about, which is always build on what the learner knows. And I feel like we all intuitively know what I mean by that, like build on prior knowledge. That seems like a really obvious thing. But through kind of my studying of educational neuroscience and through like reading and stuff like that, I've come to realise that this is just underappreciated by myself and others. Like, people will only learn stuff that connects to what they already know. Otherwise, we're kind of doing more kind of like rote learning and trying to sort of brand something onto their brains rather than kind of like stitch it into kind of like the tapestry of what they know. So we want to always like pick up the thread of what they already know and link that in to the new material. And what we already know as people is just completely shapes what we learn. We pay attention to stuff based on what we already know. So as a teacher, we know this. When you were first training and you were told to go into that expert teacher's lesson and watch what they were doing and then come away and emulate it, you'd go in and you'd sit there and you'd go, this just looks like magic. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to teach like this. Because you don't have a mental model that allows you to see what's really happening in that lesson. So you often want to go in with somebody else who's more experienced, who can whisper in your ear and kind of tell them what you're doing, or you want to go and see someone who's kind of just a notch above where you are and have some support with that. But we don't see stuff, we miss stuff based on our prior knowledge. Our prior knowledge dictates what we actually see of the world. And it also dictates, therefore, what we can learn. So if we've got really good prior knowledge of something, it acts like that kind of mental Velcro, and we're able to learn stuff far more quickly. If we don't have a lot of prior knowledge, we don't, and we need stuff like broken down and really carefully linked in to what we know. So I just think what blows my mind about the stuff we already have in our brains, in our mental models, is that it fully dictates what we get out of any situation and what we can learn. And I just think that's so important.
Wow. Okay. We need to dig into this. This is brilliant. I'm a bit obsessed with this as well. And the other thing I'd kind of add to that as well, if you agree, our prior knowledge also kind of determines the things we pay attention to as well, right? Like it's not just, and obviously what we pay attention to is what we learn. You can get two teachers of different experiences or two students of different prior knowledges, and they will be looking at completely different things. Like, I always think students, if you give them a kind of contextual maths problem, some kids will be focusing on one thing, like a surface feature, whereas the others will be looking at, will immediately notice the deep math. And as you say, to take your teacher example there, you'll get two teachers watching a lesson and they'll pick completely different aspects out of it because of their prior knowledge and experience. The attention part's fascinating, isn't it?
It is absolutely fascinating. You're totally right, and I think that's why I think this is one of the most important things that people can know. And I think another important thing that was drawn to my attention by someone I was speaking to yesterday, who's absolutely brilliant. He was saying, your knowledge, Sarah, you're kind of seeing knowledge in quite a narrow way. Think about knowledge as it depends on people's cultures. If you're teaching an RE lesson, you're trying to build on someone's knowledge of Christianity. Well, what is their knowledge of Christianity? It's not just what you taught them last lesson or last half term. It comes from their backgrounds as well. And actually, how often do we kind of dig into how someone thinks about the knowledge that we're teaching in that way? And it might be more applicable in some subjects than other subjects, but yeah, it's certainly absolutely fascinating.
This is interesting. So, okay, a couple of big questions here, which again may be bad questions and vague questions. Where do you see people go wrong with this? And you could approach this from either kind of teachers trying to get better or teachers working with students. Where do people go wrong? How do they not do this, if that makes sense?
So I think when you recognise just the fundamental importance of what somebody knows, and then you also recognise that everybody knows different stuff, even if they followed the same curriculum with you, it's better if they followed that curriculum, and you know that you've inherited this class off Craig Barton, and you know that he will have taught them this stuff, so you know you can kind of bank on that being in, you know, their prior knowledge. That's really helpful. Yeah. But even then, everybody's got this different knowledge, because everybody is different, and that's both simultaneously brilliant and really annoying, isn't it, as a teacher? So I think that where it can kind of fall down is that people don't appreciate quite how idiosyncratic everybody's like prior knowledge is. So we might ask like one hinge question with a misconception in it and think, right, gosh, they've got it, like let's move on. Actually, checks for understanding does need to be quite like deeper than that. And there was a brilliant blog I read a little while ago that we're not checking we're not checking that they understand. We're checking what they understand, because
nice.
They're not going to understand exactly what you transmitted to them, but what direction did they take that knowledge in? Did they take it in the misconception way? Did they take it in the, you know, understood it exactly as the teacher said it way? Or did they take it in some other way? And how do we check for that understanding? And I think we're good at checking for understanding because we've got all of these techniques to do it now. But do we really appreciate kind of how different everybody's knowledge is and how many directions we can take things in? And are our checking for understanding, is it robust enough? I suppose is my annoying question there.
Sarah, I'm frantically scribbling here. I've got tons of everything you say. Ideas are flying here, so I've got a few things to ask you. Anything could come out of my mouth here, just to warn you. So the first thing to say is, anytime I think about this checking for understanding, I always go back. I go back to Dylan William, just generally in life anyway. He's always got a quote for something. But I really like, well, he has his classic thing of we need to start where the student is, not where we think want the student to be. I always like that one. But I also like what he says, and I've fallen into this trap, where I've said to kids, come on, you're in year 9, surely you know this. And Dylan's point is, well, the way you get into year 9 is you're in year 8 and you have a summer holiday and then you're in year 9. Like, there's no, you know, it's not like you have to pass an exam or anything to move up a year. So, yeah, so that was the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing, I love this, check what they understand. That feels really powerful to me. So I'm a big user of diagnostic questions to check for prior knowledge, particularly prerequisite knowledge. I really like using them for that. Mm-hmm. But the kind of advantage of diagnostic questions is they're really quick to ask and collect responses in. But of course the downside is, well, first it's multiple choice, so you could guess. But also it's a very kind of, you're assessing a very specific thing, certainly with maths. Like if I ask a diagnostic question on equivalent fractions, it's a very specific thing I'm assessing their understanding of. But if I really want to know what they know about it, that one question is probably not going to cut it. So either I need to ask more questions, or I need to ask them to explain their responses. That sometimes works quite well, or generate their own examples. It's taking it above and beyond, isn't it, to go, and this idea of depth in terms of check for understanding. I think we often think in terms of depth of kind of new learning and learning something new, going deeper, but a deeper check for understanding, checking what they understand, that feels really good. Again, just a ramble there, Sarah, but
no,
I like this.
So important, and I need to credit Johnny Grand on Twitter who said the check what understanding, which is just an absolute light bulb moment for me, and brilliant blogger. I think like what you just said there really hits to the heart of something, which is like, what does it mean to understand in your subject? Like we can say like we know that I've taught it, they learnt it is false. But like, what does it mean? Like, learning isn't banking information. Yeah. Learning is developing the mental model. So what does it look at like at different stages of that development of mental model in maths, in history, whatever it is? And therefore, what do we use to check those different levels of understanding? So, for example, like your diagnostic questions, brilliant. And then it's like, so can you explain to me why the answer isn't C?
Yeah.
You know, and you will do all of that stuff, Craig. But it just gets you to that level of check that's actually like it's appreciating that understanding develops over time, and that it's not something that just happens.
Flipping heck, right. Well, I'll tell you what, I've got one kind of comment and then one question. So feel free to comment on my comment, or feel free just to kind of nod or shake your head because that's nonsense. So the thing I often get when I say to teachers, okay, right, we're going to do it's a good idea to do a prerequisite knowledge and we're going to need to dig a bit deeper and so on and so forth. They'll say, well, I haven't got time. I don't have the time. The curriculum's so jam-packed. My time has got to be spent teaching the kids the new stuff because we'll never get to the end of the scheme of work or whatever it is. And my response is always, well, if you don't do the prior knowledge check, and that knowledge isn't there, they're going to come unstuck later on, and it's just going to cost you more time as things go through. Would that be do you hear this, and would that be kind of your response as well, or is there anything else we can say here?
Yeah, I think it's a great response, but it's a great question. Like, time is so precious, and if we're going to ask teachers to do something, we have to be sure, don't we, that it's something that is worth their time. And I think your answer is great there, Craig. Like, you almost don't have time not to do this.
Yeah, that's it.
Because if we appreciate that they're only going to make things meaningful, and that's going to, so forgetting happens, doesn't it? We know, but forgetting is way more likely to happen faster if we've tried to kind of brand it onto their memories rather than like linked it in. And we can only link it in if we understand what they know. So it's worth, in my opinion, worth the time investment, as you say.
I love it. Final question on this. This is something I had a discussion with Jo Morgan, a maths teacher, who was on the show. And she said, and when she said this, I thought, you're absolutely right here. She said a lot of emphasis goes on training teachers and supporting teachers to get better at this checking for understanding, whether it's mini whiteboards, diagnostic questions, whatever it may be. But if we then don't put equal emphasis on how you then respond to that information, then it's a waste of time. And I see this in lessons, it's unbelievable. Like, you'll get a teacher who does a prerequisite knowledge check, half the kids don't have a flipping clue what's going on with it, and the teacher just cracks on. Or the teacher just says, okay, well, you do it this way, and then moves on, assuming that one sentence explanation is going to magically do it. Do you see this, that actually the respond part of responsive teaching sometimes gets kind of overshadowed by the actual mechanisms of collecting in those responses, if that makes sense?
Oh, 100%. And I think it links into what we were saying in tip number 1, which is about that we need to understand learning and the mental model that sits behind these techniques. If we understand that we're supposed to be checking for understanding, and here's a technique to check for understanding, then we fall short, because we just think that that's the job done, the check for understanding. But if we realise that the check for understanding, and that's an inbuilt part of our schema, that we need to check for understanding in order to then change our teaching, because learning only happens when we link to what they know, and now we know they know something different, then we realise that it's this process and this, what Ollie Cav talks about as a loop. We've checked for understanding, and then we've responded, and checked for understanding, then we've responded. So it's like it becomes part of a loop rather than like done the technique, tick, move on.